Our other top stories of the day. One member of Hawaii's congressional delegation is now calling on President Biden to drop out of the race. Now, Congressman Ed Case is joining the growing number of Democrats who are expressing concerns about Biden's ability to serve another 4 years. Our Mahealani Richardson joined us in the H&N Digital Center with these details.
Aloha, Dylan. We have a statement from the campaign of Ed Case. Now, we should say that his congressional office had no comment, but they did confirm that this is a statement from Ed Case's campaign, and I'm just going to read it. It says, "I do not believe President Biden should continue his candidacy for re-election as president. This has nothing to do with his character and record. If it did, there would be no decision to make. This is solely about the future, about the president's ability to continue in the most difficult job in the world for another 4-year term."
Now, Mahea, a short time ago, you also spoke with our H&N political analyst, Colin Moore. What did he say about this?
Well, it's important to remember that Ed Case, Congressman Ed Case, is the first member of Hawaii's 4-member congressional team to make this statement for President Biden to not continue in the race for president. So this is a very significant announcement. At the same time, it's not a surprise, according to H&N political analyst Colin Moore. He said that Ed Case is a moderate Democrat. He's a blue dog Democrat. He's pretty much right down the middle, a conservative Democrat. Also, he in the past has he's conflicted with some of President Biden's policy measures. So again, no surprise. Ed Case tends to be very independent in his decisions. He also said that Ed Case certainly did not make this decision in a vacuum, and that there are likely other moderate Democrats who are making this decision right now or will make future announcements very soon.
And we actually have some of what Colin Moore said. Here's some of that interview.
I think that we've heard rumblings from many members of Congress, over the recent week who are concerned, but I think it's significant that Ed Case is speaking out now. I mean, first, he's not someone who's known to make rash decisions. He's very much a moderate in Congress. He represents a very safe Democratic state. A lot of the concern we've heard from members of Congress come from those who represent swing states, who are worried about their own reelection chances. That's certainly not the case with Congressman Case. So I think it's the beginning of what we're going to see: more and more moderate members of Congress calling for President Biden to step down and allow someone else to be the nominee for the Democratic Party.
Again, that was H&N political analyst Colin Moore. Now, Mahea, we also want to make another distinction that this is coming from Ed Case's campaign side rather than his official office. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it is very interesting. His office was very, very careful to say that they had no comment. Congressman Ed Case had no comment, but the statement was coming from his campaign. And so, oftentimes we run into these things when we're talking to public relations folks and people. They try to toe the line and make sure that this is either official congressional business or this is campaign business. And clearly, they wanted to make sure that this statement was coming from his campaign.
Now, last question to you. Since Ed Case said President Biden should bow out of the race, did he offer any insight into who he thinks should fill the spot?
Well, Congressman Case didn't name anyone. In fact, let me read directly from the statement. As to who that candidate should be, there are various paths to that decision. They are difficult and uncertain, but no more difficult and uncertain than the current path, nor any reason to stay on this path, which I do not believe is the best path forward for our country. And again, analysts say that Ed Case really has nothing to lose in making this announcement. He is running for re-election. He is unopposed right now.
Our Mahealani Richardson joining us in the H&N Digital Center. Thank you so much, Mahea.